Welcome to the Kino Cave, and today I'm going to be talking about Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1. So just after Mission Impossible Fallout came out, it was a few months after, Mission Impossible movies were getting a lot of praise, especially Fallout, so I figured I better watch them. So I bought all the movies on Blu-ray, right behind me here, and I watched them all in sequence over the course of a couple of weeks, and I absolutely loved them, except maybe Mission Impossible 2, but I really enjoyed them all. I really liked Mission Impossible 1. Mission Impossible 2 is... yeah. MI3 is where I really started to enjoy the series, like, a lot. Ghost Protocol is where I really started to love the series, and that continued into Rogue Nation and Fallout. So I was very excited for this movie coming out. I rewatched all 6 of them again over the last couple of weeks. Still love all of them, even if MI2 isn't that great. And I forgot how much I really loved Fallout. I gave it 5 stars on Letterboxd because that movie really deserves it. So I was really hyped for this film, and a little worried. However, today those worries were put to rest because I absolutely loved Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1. I found it to be a really excellent film. I know it's a long movie, but it really didn't feel that way. It was really fast paced. The pacing is excellent. It does not feel like 2 hours and 40 minutes. It feels like a 2-hour movie, really. It's a very well paced movie, I have to say. This film is probably not as good as Fallout for me. I think Fallout was a bit more concise, but this is still really good. It's quite close. I think this is probably cracking the top 4, maybe top 3 Mission Impossible movies for me. So getting into spoiler-free stuff, I loved the characters in this. I thought Ethan got a lot of development, which is great. Tom Cruise definitely still has it as this character. Probably his best character that he's ever played. Absolutely loved him. Ethan Hunt, I really felt for him throughout this movie. I did in previous movies, obviously, but he gets a lot more in this movie. I really started to connect to him even more so than I did in the last few movies, which is saying something. Luther and Benji are also excellent. They get even more character development as well, which I loved. I love to see even side characters like this getting a little bit of development. It really helps to flesh out the world and flesh out the relationships between these characters. So very welcome to see these characters get even more development, even though they're kind of side characters. But I feel like we've been with Luther and Benji for so long in this franchise that they definitely deserve to get more development. Ilsa is also advanced more as a character. I absolutely love Ilsa from Rogue Nation to Fallout, and in this film as well. I think her relationship with Ethan Hunt is really an emotional core for these movies now, and I found her to be really excellent in this film, especially in terms of her relationship with Ethan. Grace, played by Hayley Atwell, is a very welcome addition to this cast of characters. I was a bit apprehensive seeing more people be put in these movies. I was kind of thinking leading up to this, why are we getting new characters? We have great characters already, but I have to say Grace is a very welcome addition to this cast of characters, and I can't wait to see what's done with her in the next film. Really excellent character, gets a lot of development as well, which is really good to see. Again, with new characters, it's tough to keep the balance because you have to introduce this character while also having some attention on these older characters. But it was really great to see Grace in this film get her character advanced more. The White Widow, played by Vanessa Kirby, also gets more development, which is great to see. Again, I love these characters coming in from previous movies, and even new characters getting introduced in these movies getting more to do. The villain, the entity as an AI, is scarily similar to our real world right now. I think AI is opening up the world to these possibilities that, while in some ways it can be viewed as useful and even hopeful, I think in a lot of ways it's also very scary. And of course this is kind of dialed up a bit because it's a Mission Impossible movie and we need some action. But I think the entity provides a threat to these characters that we can definitely see happening in the real world as well as it begins to kind of take over. The entity provides a very interesting antagonist, and not one with a lot of depth, obviously. It's an AI, but it does have a presence that I think is very good. It's not just like this robot like Skynet or something like that. This AI feels like it has a personality almost, and like it has a real face and a human connection to these characters. It feels like a real looming threat, not just conceptually, but also it feels like it's its own character, and I think the film does that very, very well. But of course, the film also provides a real antagonist that we can fight and that actually has a face, which is Gabriel, and I found him to be a really excellent villain as well. Again, not one that we've seen already. Gabriel definitely has a lot of connection to these other characters and the relationships with our heroes, and he was also a very welcome addition. Again, it's kind of strange seeing a new character come in and thinking, how are we going to differ this guy from previous Mission Impossible villains? But they did a really great job with that as well. In terms of action sequences, chase sequences, and heists and all this sort of thing, I found all of them to be really, really great, except maybe one, which I'll get to in a sec. But yeah, there's like 4 or 5 separate kind of sequences in this film between action sequences, chase sequences, heists, that they're all really thrilling, and I think especially since we have an emotional attachment to these characters, it really gets you white-knuckled and tense, and I really, really enjoyed these sequences. Some of the best sequences in all of these movies. I really love the direction in this film. I think Christopher McQuarrie is an absolutely fantastic action director. I loved what he did with Rogue Nation. I loved what he did with Fallout even more. And he does something interesting again with this film, because there seems to be a lot of callbacks to Brian De Palma's Mission Impossible movie, the first Mission Impossible. And you can see this in a lot of the camera moves and the angles and things like that. And it really does feel like a perfect mashup between Chris McQuarrie's direction from the previous 2 Mission Impossible movies, and then also calling back to Brian De Palma's first Mission Impossible movie. And I think that was a really good choice. It kind of rounds out these films a lot more and connects them a lot more. The only real part of this film that doesn't work for me is the chase sequence in the Fiat 500, which you can see part of in the trailer. I won't get too much into it because spoilers, but I found that sequence to be a little bit too drawn out, and there were aspects of it that I just didn't really like, which I won't really spoil, but that is the only real part of the movie that didn't work for me. Everything else I really loved. Okay, I'm about to get into spoilers for Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1. If you haven't seen the movie, I would absolutely recommend you go out and see it. Definitely go see it if you're an action movie fan, if you're a Mission Impossible fan, if you're a Tom Cruise fan, if you're a fan of any of these actors. Absolutely go out and see this movie. It is awesome. The sequence in the airport towards the beginning of this was really great. It might be my favorite sequence in all of the Mission Impossible movies. I absolutely loved it. It had me so white-knuckled, so tense, especially when Benji's trying to disarm the bomb using riddles, and we get these really personal moments with Benji, but we keep the tension going and the ticking clock. And then that combined with the entity kind of infiltrating the IMF team, and then also with Ethan trying to catch up to Grace and trying to get the key and all that. It was so tense. I absolutely loved it. And the fact that the mission is technically failed, Ethan calls it off because it's just too much for him. I absolutely loved it. It was really long as well, which I quite liked. It kept the tension going for a real long while. It must be like 20 minutes or half an hour. I really loved it. It was so good. So I talked about this in the non-spoilery part of this review, but the car chase in Rome with the Fiat 500, it was too long, but even then it could have been that length if they hadn't kept the comedic stuff going for so long. Because it started out pretty funny, you know, it's maybe like an older model, it's a small car, it's not really a car built for a car chase, but they make do, and it's kind of like really sensitive and stuff, and they have a really tough time driving it because they're also handcuffed to each other. It starts out very funny for the first 10 or so minutes, but then it just keeps going, and they keep kind of repeating the same joke of how the steering is too sensitive and the wheels have no grip on the ground and all that. And it just started to get kind of boring, and I started to think, okay, either make this into a more tense car chase than a comedic one, or just wrap up. I loved the sequence in the club in Venice. I found that to be really good because you see all these characters converging on each other. You have Ethan and Elsa, and then also you have Gabriel and uh, Pom Klementof's character. I can't remember her name now. Really great character as well. I loved her in the movie. Again, she's given a lot of development for a character who's just been introduced in this movie. But anyway, Grace and the White Widow and all of these characters coming together and just sitting down and having a conversation about this AI and what they all are going to do with it and how they're reacting to it. And then we find out, which I kind of had a suspicion before, with the background being kind of like all blue, and it kind of looks like how they were describing the AI at the start of the movie. And I was right, but it was still a real shocking reveal that the AI is all around them and listening to them. It's really, really excellent stuff. I loved that. It went from a really interesting kind of conversation to a real tense conversation very quickly, and I really liked that. I loved the chase slash action scene in Venice as well. I loved how the AI, the entity, was infiltrating the comm system. I love how it's telling Ethan to go places in Benji's voice and leading him in the wrong direction. And it's just so tense, especially with the action scene between Gabriel and Grace, and then later Ilsa. Really well choreographed action scene. Absolutely loved that. Probably my favorite action scene in this movie. I love good fight choreography in a movie, and this had a lot of great fight choreography in this one scene. And you get the classic Ethan Hunt running, but it's just so tense, and he has to fight off Pom Klementof's character. I can't remember the character's name, but I love that action sequence in the alleyway. It provided a lot of good kind of constraints for Ethan because it's such a narrow space and all that. Absolutely loved all that. And then, of course, he's too late to save Ilsa. I really had no idea who was going to make it out of that action sequence. It could have been any of them, it could have been all of them who made it out of that sequence. I kind of knew that Ethan Hunt was going to survive because, of course, he is. But I didn't know, was Grace going to live? I didn't know, was Gabriel going to live? I didn't know, was Elsa going to live? And she doesn't. And I found that to really hit hard. And I think that the impact of Ilsa's death really impacts the rest of the movie. And I feel like people are going to think that it's forgotten about or swept under the rug really quickly to keep the plot going. But I don't see it that way. I think Ilsa's death really affects Ethan and Luther and Benji and even Grace. Ethan starts to become more desperate to keep his team safe and keep them from coming into harm, and Benji starts to take situations way more seriously than he would have before. And Grace is really shook by Elsa's death. She really starts to feel the danger of the situation that she's in, and realizing that after this her life is not going to be the same. So coming towards the end of the movie now, the stunt where Ethan has to jump off the cliff on the bike and activate the parachute, really great stunt. Of course everybody knew about it going in. It was like the first thing that we knew about this movie, aside from maybe the title, is that that's what the stunt is going to be. Really cool, really interesting stunt. Probably the best stunt since Ghost Protocol. I found it hard to kind of judge the Ethan Hunt stunts. I think in terms of how much it impressed me personally, I think it's the best one since climbing the building in Ghost Protocol. Like, hanging off the side of the plane is really dangerous and makes Tom Cruise an insane madman, but I think riding a motorbike off a cliff, like a really high cliff, that gives me the kind of insanity as he did in that one image where he's just sitting on top of the tallest building in the world and like he has no safety net or anything. So yeah, really great stunt. I think the best one since Ghost Protocol. I loved the entire third act of this movie. I loved everything on the train, especially with Grace pretending to be the White Widow, meeting with what's his name? Kittredge. When she met with Kittredge, and she's sort of considering her options and trying to figure out where to go from here. I really liked Grace's character overall. She feels like a real fish out of water in these situations. I love her arc of starting out as a fairly skilled thief, but when she's thrust into all these covert IMF missions, she's really out of her depth and kind of in over her head a little bit. And I can't wait to see what they do with this character more in Dead Reckoning Part 2 and even subsequent movies if they make more. I'd love to see her journey becoming an IMF agent and working her way through the ranks. I think that'd be really interesting. I love how she's going through the process that every IMF agent is going through, including Ethan Hunt and Benji and Luther. But we didn't see it with those characters. We're seeing this progress with Grace's character, and it's done so well. It's written so well. I can't believe how really well written this movie is. Another little thing that I really love, and it kind of shows the progress of this franchise, is that a character by the name of Briggs, who's this agent who's looking for Ethan Hunt and trying to take him down, anytime he has a sneaking suspicion that somebody might not be who they're saying they are, he starts pulling on their face to try and see, is it a mask? I think that's a very smart thing to do when we've had 6 movies of people in the IMF, you know, doing the big reveal with the mask. And they had a little bit of that in Fallout, I feel, but I think in this movie there really is kind of a more of an attention called to, it's almost like a trope within that world. IMF agents are known for doing the shit with the masks, so now this guy's just like, is this guy who I think he is? Start pulling on his face, see is it a mask? And he's always wrong as well, which is another kind of level of comedy added to that. I really liked Gabriel as a villain for Ethan Hunt. I like the connection that they give, how he's connected to Ethan joining the IMF. I really liked that. I like how he is basically the physical manifestation of the entity, how he is, you know, the main operative working for the entity. And I really liked his connection to Ethan Hunt, and that is furthered then when he kills Elsa. Really provides a deep seated connection to Ethan and a real hatred on Ethan's part and the audience's part for him. I really enjoyed that aspect of his character. As a kind of charismatic villain, I don't think he's as good as Henry Cavill in the previous movie. I think Henry Cavill just, as an actor, I think he just brings a level of natural charisma to that role. But Gabriel is still a really excellent villain. I love the addition to the kind of lore of this universe that every IMF agent, including Ethan Hunt and Benji and Luther, they all were put in a situation where they had to make a choice to live life on the run and eventually be captured or killed, or become a member of IMF and basically become a ghost. I really enjoy that. It adds a level of depth, especially to characters like Benji and Luther. I really want to know the situation that Benji was in where he had to make the choice to become part of IMF. Like, I really want to see that. Like, I don't know, that's really, really interesting to me. And it just adds a level of depth, I think, to all of these characters and this world, that this is a situation that they've all been in. And of course then Grace is going through that and being put in that situation. It's just excellent writing. It's keeping this franchise fresh and new and interesting even after 7 films. Just a little note as well, I may have mentioned this already. I loved the addition that the most important people in Benji's life are his friends, which is revealed during the sequence when he's trying to disarm the mom. That's just, again, it just adds a layer of depth to Benji. It's such a small thing for that character, but it goes a long way in making us care even more about him. Even though we've cared about him really since MI3, but this just adds to that. And I fucking love that. The sequence when the train derailed was so good. I was so tense. Definitely a callback to Uncharted 2, probably. I wouldn't be surprised at all if there was discussions in the writer's room being like, let's just go to Uncharted 2 and use that as a storyboard for this sequence. Nevertheless, it was so good. I loved Grace's reaction because Grace, she has never been put in a situation like this before. She's always been quite confident, she's always been on top of things, but now she's being thrust into this world that she is not ready for. And it shocks her naturally, as it would shock anybody. And it's up to Ethan then to keep her focused. And I just loved those interactions as they're moving through the train. And I was just so tense and so white knuckled just watching this sequence, wondering, are these characters going to make it out of this? And it was just so good. The bit when the piano was about to fall down, and I loved the little detail that Grace won't let go of Ethan, because to Grace, Ethan is like a pillar. Like, she knows she's safe as long as she's hanging on to him, but she has to let him go if she's going to make it out. And I love how she just wouldn't let go of him for a minute, and he had to kind of, you know, break her out of that and get her to focus on what she has to do. And it was just really excellent stuff. It was so tense and just relatable in a way as well, because I think most people, if they were put in that situation, wouldn't do anything different than what Grace did. And again, I can't wait to see how Grace's character progresses now in the next movie, so she can become a more refined, more calculated agent on the level of Ethan and Luther and Benji. Finally, I really liked the ending of this film. I really, really enjoyed it. I really liked how it sets up the next movie quite well, but this still feels like a finished story. Like, this part is done, and our heroes are safe, but they need to keep going because this villain is not defeated yet. Really felt like an Empire Strikes Back and The Dark Knight and Avengers Infinity War really felt like that. I absolutely love the ending. I wouldn't have it any other way, and I'm so excited for the next movie. Really, I am. After talking about this movie and just the place that the film industry is in right now, it's in a strangely good and bad place at the moment, because WGA are on strike and SAG are on strike, and it's a real tough situation that the industry is in right now, because the WGA and SAG, they're fighting for workers' rights, and they're fighting to be treated fairly, which is a very noble cause, I think. If you care at all about this and are in a position where you can, you should help out. The Twitter account Discussing Film, they're on Instagram as well. They have links to charities and stuff that you can kind of go to support these organizations. And I know that I've kind of just started on YouTube and this might not reach a lot of people, but if it reaches anybody, I think I can rest easier at night knowing that if even one of you can maybe help out these charities to keep this fight going, to get fair treatment for these workers. You know, we all want the same thing. Everybody wants to see good movies get put out, and that's not gonna happen, I don't think, until writers and actors get what they're owed and what they deserve for their work, because it's hard work being a writer and an actor. I think those are two of the hardest jobs on a film set, because a writer needs to envision what the movie's going to look like without any prompt and make it up and hope that it turns into something after like a year. I know, because I've written a script that I'm trying to turn into a movie right now, and it's hard going for a writer. And I mean, the script I wrote is for like a half-hour long short film. I can't imagine what it must be like to write a movie like Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning. It must be an absolute mind fuck to try and write that kind of a movie. And they did it, and it's awesome. It's a really well written movie. So, of course, writers who have that hard a job deserve to be paid well and deserve to be treated fairly by these millionaires who are running these productions. And actors, again, a lot of us can look at actors and think, well, they're getting paid a lot, so why shouldn't they do a good job? Acting is such a hard job. I've never had to do it. I considered it for a while, but I realized it wasn't for me. But when you look at films like Marriage Story, or any kind of a film where an actor has to keep a level of intensity going, in a movie like Marriage Story, because this is the example I always think of, the argument scene in Marriage Story when Scarlett Johansson and Adam Driver are screaming at each other. They probably had to spend a week doing that scene over and over and over, all day, every day. Imagine having to put yourself in that headspace for 5 to 7 working days. And that's why screen actors need to be paid fairly and treated well, because they're a very important part of this industry as well. And finally, just on the movies that are coming out this year, there's been some stinkers. There's been some middle of the road kind of things. But goddamn, this last week, and I think all of next week as well, my love for movies hasn't been this strong for a while. Watching the Mission Impossible movies again, leading up to this one, which I also loved, made me remember why I love movies so much, and why this is a job that, no matter how difficult, I want to get into. And seeing Barbie, which looks like a phenomenal film, and Oppenheimer, directed by one of my favorite filmmakers of all time, getting to see those two movies next weekend, which I have very high hopes for, and I will be watching some Christopher Nolan movies this week leading up to that. I don't know what else to say except I fucking love movies. And I hope that this magic that I feel right here, I hope that never dies, ever. I hope that movies like Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning and Barbie and Oppenheimer and any other great film that comes out or has come out this year and the last few years, I hope movies like that keep getting made. And we see less of the corporate, samey, just middle of the road films that we've been getting, like Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. Not a terrible film, but not a great one by any means either. Man, movies really are magic. And I don't think any of us who love movies should allow that magic to die. So, those are my thoughts on Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1. Kind of a long title when you have to say it out loud many times. Yeah, loved this movie. Can't wait to see the next one. Possibly one of my favorite franchises of all time at this point. It's such a great franchise full of movies. So comment below, let me know what you think of the movie, let me know what you think of my thoughts of the movie. Please leave a like on the video, it really does me a lot of good, and subscribe to see more movie reviews. Because I love good fight. That character is Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning. I'm not leaving that in.